Hey, this is Toby. Welcome to Lightworks. Hi. So, today I thought I'd show you a bit about a project that I've been working on recently. It was born out of just being really bummed out in lockdown about not being able to see any live music at all. And I thought it would be fun to try and recreate what I would consider one of London's most characterful, majestic, grand, beautiful live music venues, the Royal Albert Hall. So let's get into it. So let's take a look at the reference image. Although this looks kind of daunting at first, when you consider that a lot of these items are just copied and pasted, you realise that actually this isn't too complicated, it's just lots of the same thing happening over and over again. I started off with the chairs. These were just sculpts that I used a mirror for. I think it was rough material and made them as close to red as I could see in the reference image. The back is just angled using the precise tool and making sure that it's on a grid so it lines up with the seat. It was quite important with the chairs to not overcomplicate them because there were going to be so many of them. And I think actually I'll come back to that later in the tutorial because there was a slight issue with this. Onto the legs, pretty simple. This is just another curve tool. With a curve tool I find it's easier to use if you're selecting the first point and then the end point, and then you figure out the curves in between, or at least that's how you should do it. So next up I'm just tweaking some of the shapes on the back of the chair. This is because it was a little bit too square and I wanted to also add some detailing, which is what I can see happening in the reference photo. Just using a negative sphere, making sure that the cutout is also going to be red, and just finessing the top shape. For some reason I had got the colouring wrong on a duplicate of the back of the chair. So with the colour wheel I find that it's quite difficult to match colours. So a tip is just to connect it with a wire and you'll find that it will synchronise. Now, onto the floor. This was without a doubt the hardest part of the whole project. For some reason, I went through all kinds of renditions of how to do this. It just is way more complicated than it seems. I'm trying to make a symmetrical oval shape that gets extruded, and I'm trying to cut away from that, but I'm trying to do it symmetrically. I tried using the grip. It wasn't really helping with using negative shapes cutting away. So I ended up just using a really big grid and making sure that it lined up, and I used the symmetry tool too. This was the final version that you can see here. After copying and pasting a few of the chairs, I began to get a kind of egg shape that you can see from the reference photo. So this is where I was angling the chairs. A lot of trial and error here. It was just a case of being quite fiddly with the controller. So at this point it's feeling quite good. I've got my chairs lined up, I've got the base of the floor set in, and I've got some of my tiers. But I did hit a problem. My thermo was going off the wall and I realised that my chairs had been too complex. So I ended up remaking my chairs, and instead of using a metallic element to the backs, I just used all the same material and just repainted it. So that really reduced the thermo and I was able to continue working. So next up with the booths, I was just keen to make sure that the columns were all identical, the same height. In order to do that, I just made 4 columns and essentially a small room, an individual booth if you like, with the frontages, with the ceiling, and those were just copied and pasted at angles like you saw I was doing with the chairs, and that made the kind of balustrades and the floors essentially where the booths are. Also what you'll see here is the ceiling. So the ceiling was put in as a flip of the floor, so I just copied and pasted some of my sculpts, inverted them and plonked them on top. Next up we've got some of the panelling. The panelling was a similar approach to just the chairs, the backs of the chairs with that black outline. I can see these in the reference photo, and I assume they were used for safety and maybe for sound. So next up, for the wall panels, I just had a look at the reference photo. I could see some gold and red detailing going on. And so to recreate that, I've just got a rectangular sculpt here, which I think is, again, rough material. Part of the paneling has this detail across the border. I felt like it was important to include some of these details because when you've got lighting hitting it from different angles, if you've got these big textural details, you're going to see shadows and interesting things happening with the light, which ultimately is going to help lend it to seem more realistic. As you can see, the larger panels are now complete, and I think in the reference photo I'm seeing a similar pattern underneath, but in a slightly scaled down version, so I just copied exactly what I'd done, shrunk it down and angled it the same way. As you can see here with some of the lighting, I'm just testing different angles and the light hitting the walls, and certainly the shadows are coming out and some of those reflections are starting to pop, which is exactly what I'm after. For the stage, I just created another rough sculpt, always making sure that my symmetry was on, and in fact I think I had an object in the middle of the venue just always to have a reference point as to where that middle section was. And these were just negative cutouts to make these doors that I can see in the reference photo. Okay, so this is some time later. I've added quite a few details here, so I'm just going to show you some of the main features that have been implemented. There's lighting here. Now, not all of these are spotlights, just some of them. I think there's a painting, and the painting has a wireless receiver and an action recorder. That's for the movement of the lights. A light is also emitted, which is a kind of tunnel shape. This is actually a painting that is made of circles and just is moving at a very, very fast rate. As you can see, over time, with these paintings moving very, very quickly, it gives some kind of illusion of spotlight. Other things that we have going on here: the painting in the middle of the room. Now, this is a duplicated painting that is simply being rotated. We've also got some balls, these big glowing orbs that are moving around the room. Now, these are, I believe, sculpts that were then coated with paintings and they pulse. Now, all of these details are linked up to a musical timeline, which you can see here, and these are triggering different elements in the scene, and most of that logic is found here, but it's, without going into too much detail, there's just the rotation of the balls, there is the flashing of the lights, which happen on the vocals, and the snare clap. There's another bass drum, which I believe is illuminating the balls too. And all of these lights are hooked up with wireless receivers, so you end up emulating probably a similar kind of thing that happens in the venue itself, where you've got a kind of DMX board and there's wireless transmitters and receivers to each of the lights. So this was really fun once all of this was queued up. It just meant that it would all just work, and if there was a musical timeline, it would trigger all of these events. So the only other thing that I had to do was to move the camera around, and that was just automated using an action recorder. There's also this blue paint that goes over the whole scene at times, and that's just an effect to change some of the tone as the camera moves around the venue. And there's a bit of gradient effects on as well. And that's just a bit of polish at the end. So there we have it. That was pretty much about 5 days work condensed into 10 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be doing more of these soon, so please come back again and check out some of what I've got to show you. Cheers.